Imagine this. You're standing in the middle of the most glittering night of the year, chandeliers dripping frozen starlight, every powerful wolf in the kingdom watching, and the man who once ripped your soul in half, the man who called you weak, unworthy, forgettable, is walking through that same crowd, arm around a new woman, smirking like he finally got it right, like the moon finally fixed its mistake. Because the woman who steps out onto the grand staircase, crowned, the same you he threw away, the same you he publicly rejected, the same you who disappeared into the wilds with nothing but broken pieces, and somehow, impossibly, became the hidden queen of them all. He doesn't know yet. Nobody told him. He was too busy being smug. So tell me, what does his face look like the second he realizes? The second the smirk dies and his entire world tilts? The second he understands he didn't just lose a wife, he gambled away the queen of his entire kingdom? Would you want to see that moment?
Before we continue, please kindly tell us where you are watching from, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button, because every day we have amazing stories that will make your day.
Chapter 1. The night the moon turned her back. The grand ballroom of the Silver Crown Palace breathed like a living thing tonight. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen moonlight, scattering diamonds across black marble floors. The air thrummed with violins and low wolf song drums, every note laced with the scent of pine, jasmine, and barely leashed desire. Hundreds of the realm's most powerful alphas, lunas, and nobles moved through the crowd like predators in silk. Tonight was the full moon gala, the one night when even the oldest bloodlines bowed to tradition, when alliances were forged in champagne flutes and stolen glances, when the moon herself seemed to watch from above. And at the center of it all strode Kale Voss, alpha of the Iron Fang pack, a man built like war given flesh. Broad shoulders strained the midnight velvet of his tailored coat. His jaw was sharp enough to cut glass, his gold-flecked eyes scanning the room with the lazy arrogance of someone who had never known defeat. Every step he took claimed territory. Every smile he flashed reminded the world he was apex. On his arm clung Seraphina, his chosen consort. Crimson gown hugging every sinful curve. Hair like spilled ink. Lips painted the color of fresh blood. She laughed at something he murmured, head thrown back, throat exposed in deliberate invitation. Heads turned. Whispers followed. Kale liked that. He liked it very much. He had spent the last 3 years erasing every trace of the woman who once stood in Seraphina's place. The quiet one, the soft one, the one who looked at him with eyes too full of stars and never demanded anything in return. He had called her weak. He had rejected her publicly, bond snapped like brittle bone, and sent her beyond the borders with nothing but the clothes on her back and the echo of his voice saying, "You were never Luna material." No one spoke her name anymore. She had become a cautionary tale whispered in the dark. Don't love too gently or the strongest wolf will leave you bleeding. Kale lifted Seraphina's hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles slowly, deliberately. The gesture was theater, and the audience loved it. Look at them, Seraphina purred, voice like velvet wrapped around steel. They're all jealous, they want what we have. Kale's smile was sharp. They can want, they'll never have. He turned them in a slow circle, letting every eye drink them in. The upgrade, the victory, the proof that the moon had finally gotten it right. The music swelled. A hush fell like snow. At the top of the grand obsidian staircase, the great double doors carved with crescent moons swung open. A single spotlight of moonlight sliced through the darkness. And she appeared. The crowd inhaled as one. She wore black silk that clung like liquid shadow, threaded with silver veins that shimmered as if the moon had wept onto the fabric. The neckline plunged low enough to tease, high enough to command respect. A crown of blackened silver and moonstones rested on her brow, understated, ancient, terrifying in its simplicity. Her hair fell in dark waves longer than he remembered, catching fire under the chandeliers. And her eyes? Those eyes he once dismissed as too gentle, too trusting. They burned now, quiet, unyielding, the color of storm clouds lit by lightning. Kale's heart slammed against his ribs. The glass in his hand tilted. Champagne slid over his fingers. Seraphina's grip on his arm tightened, not in affection, in sudden, instinctive fear. The woman descended, each step slow, measured, The click of her heels the only sound in the hall. No announcement. No herald. She didn't need one. Because when she reached the bottom step, every alpha in the room, every battle-scarred, pride-drenched male, dropped to one knee without being told. Lunas followed. Betas. Omegas. The entire kingdom knelt before the hidden queen. Yael remained standing, frozen. She stopped 10 paces away, close enough for him to catch her scent. Wild honeysuckle and midnight rain. The same scent that once drove him mad with want. The scent he had convinced himself was forgettable. Her gaze swept over him. Not angry, not triumphant. Just knowing. "Hello, Kale," she said softly. Her voice carried like smoke, wrapping around every ear in the room. He couldn't speak. His throat had turned to ash. Seraphina stepped forward, chin high, claws flexing. "Who the hell are you to interrupt?" The queen's eyes flicked to her. One look. Seraphina's words died. She shrank back against Kale's side like prey, sensing the end. The queen returned her attention to him. "I am Aurelia Voss," she said, the name rolling out like thunder wrapped in silk. "Queen of the United Realms, sovereign of every pack under this moon, host of this gala." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Kale's knees nearly buckled. Aurelia, his Aurelia, the woman he had broken, the woman he had discarded, the woman who had vanished into the wilds 3 years ago and, somehow impossibly, become the ruler of them all. She tilted her head, studying him the way one studies a relic from a forgotten war. "You look surprised," she murmured. He found his voice at last, rough, cracked. "How?" Aurelia's smile was small, almost tender. It hurt worse than any snarl could have. "I rebuilt myself," she said simply, "piece by bleeding piece. While you were busy parading your victory, I was learning how to wear a crown." She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the faint scar along her collarbone, the mark where he had torn the mate bond from her flesh. His hand lifted on instinct, wanting to touch it, to erase it. She didn't flinch. She simply looked down at his trembling fingers. "Don't," she whispered. The word was gentle. It sliced him open anyway. The orchestra struck up again, a slow, sensual waltz. Couples rose, hesitant, glancing toward their queen. Aurelia turned to the room. "Dance," she commanded softly. "Tonight is for celebration." The hall exhaled. Music swelled. Bodies began to move, but Kale couldn't move. She looked back at him one last time. "You are still welcome here, Alpha Voss," she said, voice laced with something almost like pity. "As a guest." Then she turned away, regal, untouchable, and offered her hand to an ancient lichen lord who bowed so low his forehead touched the marble. Kyle watched her glide into the crowd, every eye following her, every heart beating faster. Seraphina tugged at his sleeve. "Kyle." He shook her off. For the first time in his life, the strongest alpha of the Iron Fang pack felt small. And as the woman he had thrown away danced beneath the chandeliers, radiant, powerful, completely beyond his reach, the full moon poured through the skylight and bathed her in silver. She didn't look back, but he couldn't look away. Chapter 2. Shadows of the Bond. The waltz kept spinning long after Aurelia disappeared into the sea of bowing nobles. Kale stood rooted to the marble like a statue of a man who had just been struck by lightning and was still waiting for the thunder. Seraphina tugged at his sleeve again, sharper this time. "Kyle, everyone's staring." "Let them." He shook her off without looking at her. His eyes were still locked on the place where Aurelia had last been visible, a swirl of black silk vanishing behind a column of living ivy and silver roses. His chest felt cracked open. Every breath tasted like regret and old blood. Seraphina stepped in front of him, crimson lips curled in something between fury and panic. "You're making a scene. She's nothing, a ghost playing dress-up. You're the alpha of Iron Fang." "Shut up." The words came out low, lethal. Seraphina flinched as if slapped. He didn't wait for her reaction. He moved, long, predatory strides cutting through the dancers like a blade through silk. Nobles parted without being asked. No one dared meet his gaze. He found the shadowed corridor behind the grand staircase. The music dulled to a distant heartbeat. Torchlight flickered in iron sconces, painting everything gold and black. And there she was. Aurelia, not hiding, not fleeing, simply standing beneath an arched window that framed the swollen full moon like a halo. She had her back to him, one hand resting lightly on the stone sill. the other holding a slender glass of something dark and shimmering. She didn't turn when he stopped a few paces behind her. But she spoke. "You always did walk like you owned every room you entered." Her voice was soft, too soft. It wrapped around his throat and squeezed. Cale swallowed. "I didn't know." A small, humorless laugh drifted from her. "I know you didn't." She finally turned. Moonlight carved her cheekbones, turned her eyes into twin storms. The crown still sat on her brow like it had grown there. He took one step closer, then another. The air between them crackled. Old bond, broken but not dead, snapping like dying embers. "You're queen." The word felt foreign on his tongue. "Impossible." "I am." "How?" Aurelia tilted her head, studying him the way one studies something fragile and foolish. "I walked into the wilds with nothing, no pack, no name, no mate." Her gaze dropped to the scar on her collarbone, the pale crescent where he had ripped their bond free. "I survived. Then I fought, then I conquered, one bloodied step at a time." She lifted her eyes again. "While you were choosing someone louder." Cale's fist clenched at his sides. "I thought—" "You thought I was weak." She said it without venom. Simply fact. "And you were right, I was, for a long time." Another step. He could smell her now, honeysuckle, rain, and something darker underneath. Something that used to make him lose control in the best ways. "I was wrong." The admission tore out of him. Aurelia's expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened around the stem of the glass. "You were," she agreed quietly. Silence stretched, thick and painful. Then she asked almost gently, "Why did you come after me, Kyle?" He didn't have an answer ready. "Because I couldn't breathe when you walked away. Because seeing you crowned broke something fundamental inside me. Because I still dream about the way you used to whisper my name when I was inside you." Instead, he said, "Because you're still mine." Wrong answer. Aurelia's eyes flashed, not anger. Something colder, deeper. "I stopped being yours the night you tore the bond from my skin and told the entire court I was unworthy." She set the glass down with deliberate calm. "I belong to no one now, least of all you." Cale closed the last distance between them in 2 strides. He towered over her, chest heaving. His hand lifted, hovering near her cheek, trembling. "Don't," she warned, voice barely above a whisper. But he didn't listen. His fingers brushed her jaw, feather-light, reverent. She didn't pull away. Not at first. For one shattering heartbeat, she let him touch her, let him feel the warmth of her skin, the faint tremor beneath it. Then she caught his wrist. Hard. Her grip was iron. "You no longer have the right to touch what you discarded." The words landed like claws. He froze. She stepped back and slow, regal, untouchable again. "Enjoy the rest of the gala, Alpha Voss." Her voice was velvet over steel. "As my guest." She turned to leave. Cale's hand shot out, catching her wrist this time. She stilled. He leaned in, voice raw, broken. "I remember our wedding night." Aurelia's breath caught on the only crack in her armor. Moonlight, forest floor. Her body arching beneath him, nails raking down his back, his name torn from her throat in desperate, pleading gasps. The way she had clung to him like he was the only solid thing in the universe. The way he had marked her again and again, growling promises he never kept. "I remember every second," he rasped. "How you trembled when I first slid inside you. How you begged for more, how you said you'd love me forever." Aurelia's eyes glistened, and not tears. "Not quite." "Then you should also remember," she whispered, "how you threw that forever away." She twisted free with a strength he hadn't known she possessed. This time, when she walked away, she didn't look back. Cale stood alone in the corridor, the taste of her scent still on his tongue, the ghost of her skin burning his palm. And somewhere in the ballroom, the orchestra played on, a slow, aching waltz that sounded suspiciously like mourning. Chapter 3, The Queen's Private Chambers. Aurelia didn't run. She never ran anymore. She walked at measured, spine straight, heels clicking like the slow toll of a bell, through the labyrinth of private corridors that only the sovereign knew by heart. The sounds of the gala faded behind her. Laughter, music, the clink of crystal, the low growl of power plays disguised as flirtation. All of it belonged to another life now, one she had once begged to be part of. The double doors to her private wing opened at the barest brush of her fingertips, ancient wards recognizing blood and bone and heartbreak. They closed behind her with a soft final sigh. Silence, blessed terrible silence. She crossed the vast chamber without lighting the sconces. Moonlight was enough. It poured through the towering arched windows that overlooked the blackwood forest, turning every surface silver in shadow. Her crown felt heavier tonight. She reached up, fingers curling around the blackened silver thorns, and lifted it free. The weight left her brow like a lover finally releasing her throat after too long a kiss. She set it carefully on the obsidian pedestal beside her bed, the same pedestal that had once held nothing but wildflowers when she was still just Luna. The gown came next. She didn't call for attendance. Never did anymore. Silk whispered down her body like a sigh of surrender. It pooled at her feet in a dark tide. She stepped out of it naked, skin prickling in the cool air. Every scar a story she had learned to wear proudly. The thin crescent at her collarbone, the faint claw marks along her left ribs from the first border skirmish she'd fought alone, the pale line across her lower belly where she'd almost bled out claiming the throne. She walked to the bathing pool sunk into the far corner of the chamber, black marble veined with silver, steam already rising because the wards knew what she needed before she asked. The water was hot. Perfect. She sank in slowly, letting it swallow her to the shoulders, then to the chin, then tipping her head back until only her face remained above the surface, eyes closed. For the first time all night, the mask slipped. A single tear traced down her temple, disappearing into the water before anyone could witness it. Not weakness, just memory. She remembered his hands, not the arrogant ones that had gripped Seraphina's waist tonight. The other hands, the ones that used to shake when they touched her, reverent, almost frightened, like he couldn't quite believe the moon had given him something so soft. She remembered the night he'd first claimed her, forest floor damp with dew, his body covering hers like armor. The way he'd growled her name, Aurelia, like a prayer when he slid inside her the first time. Slow, careful, stretching her until she gasped and clung and begged without shame. She remembered how he'd kissed the tears from her cheeks when the pleasure became too much, how he'd whispered, "I've got you, always, always." The word still tasted like blood in her mouth. Her hand drifted beneath the water, trailing down her own body, the path he used to trace with his tongue. Over collarbone, between breasts, lower. She didn't rush. She let her fingers linger where his had once worshipped. The sensitive dip beneath her navel, the crease of her hip, the soft inner thigh that used to make her tremble when he breathed against it. Tonight she touched herself the way he used to. Slow, deliberate, almost cruel in its tenderness. Her breath hitched, head tipped back against the marble edge. She imagined, and against every better instinct, that it was his hand instead. Rougher, hungrier, the way he used to curl two fingers inside her and stroke that spot that made her see stars, growling into her neck. "Come for me, little mate. Let me feel you shatter." Her hips rolled involuntarily. Water lapped against her skin. A soft moan escaped, half pain, half pleasure. She hated that she still wanted him. Hated that her body remembered every filthy, beautiful thing he'd ever done to her. Hated that even now, 3 years after he'd ripped the bond from her soul, the ache between her legs still whispered his name. She brought herself to the edge on trembling thighs shaking, then stopped. Just stopped, because she refused to give him her release. Not even in memory. She rose from the water like a goddess being born again. Rivulets tracing every curve, moonlight turning her skin to pearl and shadow. She stepped out dripping and walked to the massive bed without drying off. Sheets of charcoal silk welcomed her like old lovers. She lay on her back, arms above her head, staring at the canopy embroidered with silver constellations. And then she heard it. A soft click. The hidden door, the one only the sovereign and her most trusted could open, eased open. She didn't startle. She'd left it unlocked tonight. Deliberately. Kyle stepped into the moonlight. He looked wrecked. Hair disheveled as though he'd dragged his hands through it 100 times. Coat gone, shirt open at the throat. Sleeves rolled to his forearms, veins standing out from how hard he'd been clenching his fists. He stopped 3 paces inside the threshold. Eyes dark, pupils blown, breath ragged. He took in the sight of her, naked, glistening, sprawled across black silk like an offering he no longer deserved, and made a sound low in his throat. Half growl, half plea. Aurelia propped herself up on her elbows. Slow, unhurried. The movement made her breasts sway gently, water still dripping from her nipples. She watched his gaze devour her, watched his hands fist at his sides. Then she spoke, voice husky from the bath and the almost climax she'd denied herself. "Prove you're worthy of a queen, Kyle." She let her knees fall open, just enough. Just enough to make the invitation unmistakable. His chest heaved. One step forward, then another. But she lifted a hand, palm out. "Not yet." He froze. She smiled, small, dangerous, beautiful. "First, you kneel." The air between them crackled with old magic and new wounds. Cale Voss, Alpha of Ironfang, conqueror of armies, stared at the woman he'd thrown away. And slowly, agonizingly, he dropped to one knee. Then the other. Head bowed. Not in defeat. In something far more dangerous. In hope. Aurelia watched him kneel in the moonlight. And for the first time in 3 years, she let herself smile. A real one. Sharp, said, and just a little bit hungry. Chapter 4, Forbidden Dance. The silence in the Queen's chamber stretched thin and electric. Cale remained on his knees. Head bowed, shoulders rigid, breath coming in uneven pulls. The moonlight carved harsh lines across his face. Pride warring with something rawer, something that looked dangerously close to surrender. Aurelia watched him from the bed, still naked, still glistening faintly from the bath. Yet the vulnerability of her bare skin felt like armor now. She had never felt more clothed than in this moment of absolute exposure. She let the quiet grow until it pressed against their skin like a third presence in the room. Then she spoke, voice low, almost gentle. "Get up." He lifted his head slowly. Gold eyes met hers, dark, stormy, questioning. She slid from the sheets in one fluid motion, bare feet silent on the cool marble, crossed the distance between them without hurry. When she stopped, she was close enough that he had to tilt his head back slightly to hold her gaze. She reached down, fingers curling under his chin, not rough but firm. She tilted his face up further, forcing him to really look at her. "You think this is how it works?" she murmured. "That you kneel once and the years disappear?" Cale's throat worked. "No." "Then why are you still on your knees?" "Because I don't know what else to do," he answered, voice hoarse. "Because everything I thought I understood about power feels like ash when I look at you now." Something flickered in her chest, sharp, unwelcome, achingly familiar. She released his chin, turned away, walked toward the center of the chamber where moonlight pooled brightest, forming a perfect silver circle on the floor. She stopped in the middle of it, extended one hand. No words, just the gesture. Cale rose, slow, careful, like a man afraid the ground might give way beneath him. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopped just outside the silver circle. She didn't look at him when she spoke again. "Dance with me." It wasn't a question. He hesitated, only for a heartbeat. Then he stepped into the moonlight. No music played. The distant strains of the Gala orchestra were too far away, muffled by stone and secrets. But the night itself seemed to hum. Wind through the open arches, the slow heartbeat of the sleeping forest beyond the windows, the pulse in their own veins. He took her hand. The contact burned. Not lust, not yet, not tonight. Something deeper. The ghost of a bond that had been ripped away but never fully died. She placed her other hand on his shoulder. He settled his at the small of her back, careful, reverent, barely touching. They began to move. Slow. No flourish. No performance. Just 2 bodies remembering how to exist in the same space without tearing each other apart. She led. He followed. The steps were simple, a waltz stripped down to its bones. Turn. Step. Sway. Every time their hips brushed, every time her breath ghosted across his throat, the air grew thicker. Neither spoke. Words felt too small for the things moving between them. She could feel his heartbeat through his open shirt. Fast, unsteady, nothing like the calm, arrogant rhythm she remembered from years ago. His fingers flexed once against her spine, not possessive, just needing to know she was real. She let him feel it. Let him feel the warmth of her skin, the steady rise and fall of her breathing, the faint tremor she couldn't quite hide. When she turned in his arms, back to his chest for one long rotation, he exhaled against her hair. A sound that might have been her name, might have been a prayer. She closed her eyes, allowed herself, just for this heartbeat, to remember what it felt like to be held by someone who once swore forever. The moonlight turned their shadows into one long, entwined silhouette on the far wall. They danced until the circle of silver began to shift, the moon continuing its ancient path across the sky. Until their steps grew slower, until they were barely moving at all, just standing wrapped in each other, breathing the same air. His forehead came to rest against hers, careful, asking permission without words. She didn't pull away, but she didn't lean in either. She simply existed there, in the terrible, beautiful space between what was and what might never be again. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "This doesn't mean I forgive you. I know. This doesn't mean I want you back. I know." She opened her eyes, found his already watching her, dark, devastated, and so very alive. "Then why are you still holding me?" she whispered. "Because letting go again might actually kill me." The honesty in it, raw, unpolished, pierced something deep inside her chest. She stepped back, not harshly, just enough to break the circle of his arms. The sudden absence of his warmth felt like winter. She turned toward the window, arms wrapping around herself. "Go back to the Gala, Kale." He didn't move. "I said go." Still no movement. She looked over her shoulder, found him watching her, not with anger, not with arrogance, with something quiet and final. "Serafina will be looking for you. Let her look." Aurelia closed her eyes for a second, gathering what remained of her armor. When she opened them again, her voice was steady. "I'm not the girl you left behind. That girl died the night you rejected her. What stands here now is something else, and you don't get to walk in and reclaim her just because you finally see what she's become." She turned fully to face him. "I will not be your redemption story, Kale Voss. I am my own ending, and my beginning, and everything in between." He took one step toward her, then stopped when she raised a hand. The gesture was small. It might as well have been a wall of iron. He bowed his head once, slow, formal, then turned, walked to the hidden door, paused with his hand on the frame. Without looking back, he said, "I don't want redemption. I just want a chance to look at you without the shame choking me every time." She didn't answer. The door closed behind him with a soft, final sound. Aurelia stood alone in the moonlight, arms still wrapped around herself, and for the first time in 3 long years, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she had lost. Not him, but the version of herself that had once believed love could be simple. She walked back to the bed, curled into the sheets that still carried the faint warmth of her bath, and as the moon slid lower in the sky, she let one single silent tear fall. Not for him. For the girl who used to dance with him like the world was gentle. That girl was gone, and the queen who remained was only just beginning to understand how much she still had left to mourn. Chapter 5: The Hunt. Aurelia did not sleep. After Kale left, the chambers felt too large, too quiet, too full of echoes. She rose before dawn, dressed in black riding leathers instead of silk, braided her hair tight against her scalp, and strapped a slender silver dagger to her thigh. Not for show, but because old habits from the wild years refused to die. The annual royal hunt began at first light. Tradition demanded the sovereign lead the first charge. Tradition also allowed any alpha bold enough to petition for a place in the vanguard, a chance to ride at the queen's flank, to prove strength, stamina, worth. Kyle had petitioned at dawn. She had approved it, not out of kindness, out of curiosity. She wanted to see what remained of the man who once hunted with effortless dominance. She wanted to know if the arrogance still lived in his bones, or if regret had finally carved something new. The assembly point was the great clearing at the edge of the Blackwood, a wide bowl of frost-kissed grass surrounded by ancient pines that whispered when the wind moved through them. Horses stamped, breath steaming in the cold. 200 riders in ceremonial armor, fur cloaks, and moon-etched helms waited in disciplined silence. Aurelia arrived last. She rode a massive black mare named Nyx. No saddle, only a thin blanket and reins of braided silver. The horse moved like liquid shadow beneath her. Every head turned, every knee bent, riders remaining mounted, heads bowed in the old way. She reined Nyx to a halt at the head of the line. Her gaze swept the vanguard. Found Kale instantly. He sat a gray wolfhound stallion, huge, scarred, eyes the same molten gold as his riders. He wore no helm. His dark hair was wind-tossed, cheeks flushed from the cold. Their eyes met across the frost. She felt the jolt in her chest, the same one she'd felt when he first touched her in the moonlight last night. She crushed it, raised one hand. The horn sounded 3 long, mournful notes. The hunt began. They poured into the forest like a dark tide. Aurelia led, not recklessly. She never did anything recklessly anymore, but fast. Nyx flew over fallen logs, through narrow gaps between trunks, never hesitating. Behind her, the thunder of hooves, the occasional sharp cry of a wolf shifter changing mid-gallop, the baying of hounds. She felt Cale. Not just heard him. Felt him. He stayed close, never overtaking, never falling more than 3 horse lengths behind. A shadow at her shoulder. Persistent. Silent. The first kill came quickly. A massive white stag older than most of the trees, antlers like a crown of bone. Aurelia did not take the shot. She veered left at the last second, letting the beast crash through the underbrush. The pack followed without question. Cale did not. He cut right. Arrow already knocked, bow drawn in one smooth motion. The shaft flew true. The stag dropped cleanly. One clean strike through the heart. A cheer rose from the riders behind them. Aurelia reined Nyx to a sharp halt. Turned. Cale dismounted in one fluid movement, approached the fallen animal, knelt, and spoke the old words of thanks to the moon for the gift of the hunt. Then he looked up and straight at her. No triumph in his eyes, just quiet challenge. She felt something stir in her chest. Not anger exactly. Respect? No, something hotter. She dismounted, walked to him. The other riders hung back, sensing the shift in the air. Aurelia stopped just short of the carcass, looked down at the stag, then at him. You always did like to finish what I started. Her voice was low, meant for him alone. Cale rose slowly. I thought you were letting it go. I was. Then why does it feel like you're testing me? She stepped closer, close enough that the steam of their breaths mingled in the cold. Because I am. His gaze dropped to her mouth for one heartbeat, then snapped back to her eyes. I'm not the same man. I know, she said softly. That's the problem. She turned away, remounted Nyx in one smooth motion. Leave the kill for the lower ranks, she told the nearest beta. We ride deeper. The hunt continued. Harder, faster, through frozen streams, up rocky inclines, into the heart of the blackwood where the trees grew so close the sunlight never touched the ground. Aurelia pushed them, pushed herself, pushed him. Every time the pack thought they had gained ground, she found another path. Narrower, steeper, more punishing. And every time Cale was there, not falling behind, not surging ahead, just present, unshakable. By midday they reached the Mirror Lake, a perfect circle of black water that reflected the winter sky like glass. Aurelia called the halt. Riders dismounted, breathing hard, laughing in that ragged way of those who have survived something beautiful and brutal. She walked to the water's edge alone, stared at her reflection. The queen, the survivor, the woman who had rebuilt herself from ruin. Cale approached quietly, stopped a respectful distance away. I didn't come to win the hunt, he said. She didn't turn. Then why did you come? To remember what it felt like to ride at your side. She closed her eyes. The wind moved through the pines with a long, slow sigh. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter than the frost on the grass. You used to say the forest felt alive when we hunted together, that it sang for us. It still does. She turned then, met his gaze. For the first time since the Gala, she let him see the fracture lines beneath her armor. The places where the girl he'd left still bled. It doesn't sing for us anymore, Cale. It sings for me. He took one step closer. She didn't retreat. He took another. She lifted her chin, not in challenge, in quiet warning. He stopped, close enough to reach for her. He didn't. Instead, he said, voice rough, Then let me learn the new song. The words landed soft, devastating. She looked at him, really looked, saw the shadows beneath his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands flexed as if they remembered every curve of her body and ached with the loss. She stepped forward, then one deliberate step, close enough that he could feel her warmth through the freezing air. She reached up, laid her palm against his chest, right over his heart, felt it thunder beneath her hand. Then she leaned in, lips a breath from his ear, and whispered, You don't get to learn it by asking. She stepped back, turned, walked to Nyx, mounted, and rode away. Back toward the palace, went without once looking behind her. Cale remained standing at the edge of the Mirror Lake, watching her disappear into the trees. The reflection in the water showed a man alone, powerful, proud, and utterly undone. And somewhere in the distance the forest kept singing, only for her. Chapter 6, Whispers of Treason. The ride back to the palace was long. The forest seemed to close in tighter with every mile, branches reaching like fingers trying to pull riders from their mounts. Aurelia kept Nyx at a steady canter, refusing to look behind her even once. She didn't need to. She could feel Kale's presence like heat at the back of her neck, steady, unyielding, refusing to fade. When the palace spires finally rose through the tree line, the sky had already turned the bruised purple of late afternoon. Stable hands rushed forward. Banners snapped in the rising wind. She dismounted without ceremony, handed the reins to a waiting boy, and strode toward the eastern wing, the war room. She didn't invite anyone to follow. She didn't need to. The heavy iron-bound doors groaned open at her approach. Inside, the chamber was already lit by low braziers and a long table covered in maps, troop markers, and half-empty goblets of spiced wine. Her council waited, 6 of them, the only ones she trusted with the kingdom's darkest secrets. They rose as one. She took her place at the head of the table without preamble. Speak. The spymaster, a lean woman named Vera whose eyes never blinked quite in unison, stepped forward first. 3 separate reports in the last 48 hours, all pointing to the same thing. She placed a small folded parchment sealed with black wax on the table. Someone is moving against you. Aurelia didn't touch the parchment. She already knew it would be bad. How many packs? At least 4 confirmed. Shadowpine, Duskfang, Crimson Hollow, and one we didn't expect. Vera's voice dropped. Ironfang. The name landed like a blade between ribs. Aurelia's expression didn't change, but the air in the room grew colder. Continue. They're calling it the True Moon Restoration, claiming the throne was stolen by an outsider, a rejected Luna who clawed her way up through blood instead of rightful lineage. Vera's lip curled faintly. They're using your past against you. Aurelia let the silence stretch. Then quietly, and they're using Kale? Not directly. Vera hesitated, rare for her. But his name is on every whispered tongue. They say he's the rightful alpha consort, that you were only ever meant to be his Luna, that the kingdom should be returned to the old order. Aurelia finally reached for the parchment, broke the seal with a thumbnail. The handwriting was elegant, unfamiliar, but the venom was unmistakable. The moon remembers who was cast aside. Soon the kingdom will remember too. She folded it once, set it aside, then she looked up. Double the guard on the outer wall. Triple it on the inner sanctum. I want eyes on every courier leaving the palace tonight. Her voice was calm, too calm. Find the leak. Find it before the next full moon. The council murmured assent. Began to move. All except one. Kyle had slipped in behind them sometime during the briefing. He stood now in the doorway, arms crossed, expression unreadable. The room stilled. Aurelia met his gaze across the length of the table. You heard. It wasn't a question. I heard. He stepped inside. The doors closed behind him with a heavy thud. You think I'm part of this? I think, she said slowly, that your name is being used, whether you know it or not. Kale walked forward until he reached the opposite end of the table, placed both palms flat on the wood. I'm not part of any plot to take your throne. Then prove it. He looked at her, really looked. The way he used to when they were young and the world was only forest and moonlight. I already am. He pushed off the table, walked around it, past the council members who watched like hawks, stopped beside her, close enough that she could smell the pine and frost still clinging to his leathers from the hunt. I'm not asking for forgiveness tonight, he said quietly. I'm asking to stand where I should have stood years ago. At your side, not behind you, not against you. The council held their breath. Aurelia didn't move, but her voice, when it came, was softer than anyone expected. You think standing beside me will silence the whispers? No. He shook his head once. But it will make them choke on them. Something shifted in the room, subtle, tectonic. She studied him for a long moment. Then she turned to Vera. Add Alpha Voss to the inner guard rotation. Effective immediately. Vera's brows lifted, the closest she ever came to surprise.
Aurelia looked back at Kyle. This is not trust, she said. This is a test. I know. If you betray me, I won't. She stepped closer, until the space between them was nothing at all. If you do, she finished, voice barely above a whisper, I will carve your name from every history book and every Moonlit song. And when they speak of the Iron Fang Alpha, they will only remember the man who tried and failed. Cale didn't flinch. He simply inclined his head, once deeply. Understood, my queen. She turned away first. Council dismissed. We meet again at midnight. They filed out in silence. When the last one left, the doors closed. Only the two of them remained. Aurelia walked to the map table, traced the border of Iron Fang territory with one finger. You should know, she said without looking up, that if this is some long game to win me back. It's not. She glanced over her shoulder. He was watching her with an intensity that made the air feel thinner. I lost the right to play games with your heart the night I broke it, he said. I'm not here for redemption. I'm here because the woman I love is in danger, and I'd rather die than watch her face it alone. The word, love, hung between them like smoke. Aurelia's finger stilled on the map. She didn't speak, didn't breathe. After a long moment, she simply said, Then don't die. She walked past him toward the door. At the threshold, she paused, without turning. Midnight. Don't be late. The door closed behind her. Cale remained standing in the war room, alone, surrounded by maps of a kingdom he once thought he could rule. And quietly, so quietly no one would ever hear, he whispered, I won't be.
Chapter 7. The Broken Crown. Midnight arrived like a held breath. The war room felt smaller with only the two of them inside. Braziers had burned low. The maps lay forgotten under scattered reports and empty goblets. The only light now came from the narrow windows high on the walls, slivers of moonlight cutting across the stone floor like silver knives. Aurelia stood at the far end, back to the door, hands braced on the table's edge. Her shoulders were straight, but the line of her spine carried a faint tremor that only someone who once knew every inch of her would notice. Cale had not spoken since entering. He simply watched her, the way moonlight caught the braid she hadn't bothered to unwind after the hunt, the way her fingers curled against the wood as though holding herself together by force. Finally, she broke the silence. You're bleeding. He glanced down. A thin line of red had seeped through the bandage he'd hastily wrapped around his left forearm after the hunt. A branch had caught him when he'd pushed too hard to keep pace with her. It's nothing. She turned then, eyes dark, unreadable. Sit. He didn't argue. Lowered himself onto the heavy oak chair nearest the dying fire. She crossed the room in slow, deliberate steps, retrieved a small cedar box from a side table and set it down beside him. When she actually knelt in front of him to unwrap the crude bandage, Cale's breath caught audibly. Aurelia didn't acknowledge the sound. She worked in silence, peeled away the cloth, cleaned the shallow gash with a cloth soaked in herbal spirits, pressed a fresh poultice against it. Her touch was clinical, professional, until it wasn't. Her fingers lingered, just a second too long, on the inside of his wrist where his pulse hammered. She felt it. He knew she felt it. When she lifted her eyes to his, they were no longer cold. They were exhausted and sad and so very, very tired of being strong alone. Why are you here, Cale? She asked again. The same question she'd asked in the corridor after the gala, but this time it carried no armor. He answered the same way. Because I love you. The words came out rough, cracked open, stripped of pride. She closed her eyes. A single tear escaped, fast, furious, and tracked down her cheek before she could stop it. Cale lifted his uninjured hand slowly, gave her every chance to pull away. She didn't. His thumb brushed the tear away with heartbreaking gentleness. I never stopped, he whispered. Not for one day. Not for one night. I convinced myself I had. I convinced myself you were better off without me. But every time I closed my eyes, it was you. Aurelia's breath shuddered. She rose, not away from him but closer, stood between his knees. He looked up at her like she was the moon itself. She cupped his face in both hands, thumbs tracing the sharp line of his cheekbones, the faint scar at his temple from a battle long before they met. You broke me, she said quietly. You broke me so completely that I had to die to become someone new. I know. And I still feel you in every quiet moment. She leaned down, forehead resting against his, breaths mingling. Neither moved to kiss. They simply existed there, foreheads touching, breathing each other in, letting the years of silence and pain settle between them like dust after a long storm. I don't know how to forgive you yet, she admitted, voice small. I don't know if I ever will. I don't expect you to. Then what do you want? He swallowed hard. I want to earn the right to stand in the same room as you without feeling like I'm stealing air. Another tear fell, and this one landing on his cheek. She whispered, Then stay. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It was something smaller, more fragile. A crack in the wall she'd built around her heart, barely wide enough for moonlight to slip through. Cale closed his eyes, nodded once. She straightened, took a step back. But before she could retreat fully, he caught her hand, gently, reverently, brought it to his lips, pressed the softest kiss to her knuckles, the same place he used to kiss her every morning when they woke tangled together. Then he let go. Aurelia looked down at him, at the man who had once been her entire world, who had shattered it, and who was now kneeling in the ruins asking for nothing but the chance to help sweep them up. She didn't speak. She simply turned toward the door. At the threshold she paused. Tomorrow we ride for Shadowpine territory. We confront the first whispers at their source. She looked back over her shoulder. Be ready at dawn. He rose slowly. I will be. She nodded once, small, almost imperceptible. Then she was gone. Cale remained in the war room long after the door closed. He touched the place on his wrist where her fingers had rested. Felt the ghost of her warmth still there, and for the first time in 3 years, the ache in his chest didn't feel like punishment. It felt like hope. Small, wounded, but breathing. Outside the window, the moon watched them both, silent, ancient, and patient. Chapter 8, Silver. Dawn broke cold and merciless over the palace. The sky bled pale rose and steel gray as the vanguard assembled in the courtyard. 50 of the Queen's most trusted riders, black cloaks snapping in the wind like raven wings. No banners, no fanfare, only quiet purpose and the soft clink of steel. Aurelia appeared first, mounted on Nyx, her face carved from the same winter stone as the walls behind her. She wore no crown today, only a thin silver circlet that caught the first light like a promise of violence. Cale rode up beside her moments later. He had chosen the same gray stallion from the hunt. His armor was simple, dark, unmarked. No iron fang crest, no flourish. Only the dagger at his hip and the weight of yesterday's confession still hanging between them like smoke. She didn't look at him when he fell into place at her right flank. She didn't need to. The entire formation felt the shift, the way space itself seemed to tighten when the two of them were near. The ride to Shadowpine territory took most of the day. They moved through frost-crusted valleys and silent pine forests, speaking little. When they finally crested the ridge overlooking the Shadowpine stronghold, the sun was already bleeding low behind the mountains. The keep below was old, older than most bloodlines, built of dark granite veined with silver ore that glittered like frost even in fading light. Banners of deep indigo hung limp from the towers. No welcoming horns sounded. Aurelia reined Nyx to a halt, raised one hand. The column stopped behind her, a perfect, disciplined line. She spoke without turning. Kyle. He urged his stallion forward until their knees nearly brushed. Yes, my queen. She finally looked at him. Her eyes were storm-dark, but beneath the surface something flickered, not anger. Not quite forgiveness. Something rawer. Something that hurt to breathe around. You will ride at my left, she said. Never more than one stride behind. If they strike, you do not shield me. You stand beside me. Do you understand? His throat worked once. Yes. She nodded, once sharp, and urged Nyx down the slope. The great gates of Shadowpine opened before they reached them. Lord Darius stood in the archway, tall, silver-haired, eyes the color of old ice. Behind him 12 armed guards. Behind them, shadows that moved like people trying not to be seen. Aurelia stopped 10 paces from the gate. Darius inclined his head, the barest fraction. My queen. The title sounded like a question. She answered it anyway. Lord Darius, I come to hear your grievances in person. His gaze flicked to Cale, lingered on the place where the Iron Fang Alpha rode without insignia, then returned to her. Some grievances are better whispered than shouted in courtyards. Then whisper. Darius smiled, thin, careful. Very well. We believe the throne has been misaligned. The moon's will was once clear. A strong alpha pair, bloodline unbroken. Not a lone queen who rose through conquest alone. Aurelia's expression never changed. Conquest is how thrones are kept, Lord Darius. Not inherited. He stepped forward. And yet, many remember a time when you stood beside a worthy consort. A king in waiting. Kyle's hand drifted toward his dagger, slow, instinctive. Aurelia's voice cut through before he could draw. If you speak of Alpha Voss, speak to him directly. He is here. He hears you. Darius turned to Kale. You were cast aside once, Alpha. Now you ride at her flank like a loyal hound. Tell me, do you truly believe she is fit to rule alone? Kale's voice came low, steady, dangerous. I believe she is fit to rule the world alone. And I believe any man who questions that deserves the blade that ends him. Silence. Thick. Cold. Darius's smile faltered. Aurelia spoke into the quiet. I will give you one chance, Lord Darius. Kneel. Swear fealty again, publicly before your people, or we end this here. He studied her for a long moment. Then slowly, so slowly it felt like insult, he shook his head. No. The word echoed. Then chaos. Arrows hissed from the upper battlements, not at Aurelia but at Kale. He moved faster than thought, twisting, shielding her with his body even as she had forbidden it. The first shaft grazed his shoulder, tore through leather, drew blood. Aurelia's snarl was pure wolf. She leaped from Nyx's back, silver dagger already in hand, and met the first guard who rushed forward. Steel sang. Kale was beside her in the next breath, blade drawn, eyes blazing. They fought back to back, seamless, instinctive, the way they once had in smaller skirmishes before everything shattered. Every swing, every block, every parry remembered the other's rhythm. When the last guard fell, the courtyard was silent except for heavy breathing and the drip of blood on stone. Darius stood alone now, sword drawn but trembling. Aurelia stepped forward. Blood streaked her cheek, not hers. She looked down at him. You chose. She raised her blade. Darius dropped to his knees, not in fealty. In surrender. I yield, he rasped. Aurelia's arm didn't waver, but she looked over her shoulder. At Kale. He stood there and bleeding from the shoulder, chest heaving, eyes locked on her. Not asking, not begging, just present. She lowered the dagger. Bind him, she told the nearest rider. He will face trial, not execution. She turned away, walked to where Nyx waited. Kale followed, one stride behind as ordered. When they were out of earshot of the others, she stopped. Didn't look at him. You shielded me. I know. I told you not to. I know. She finally turned, looked up into his face, at the blood, at the exhaustion, at the quiet ferocity still burning in his eyes. You bled for me, she said softly. Again. He gave her the smallest, saddest smile. I'd bleed every day for the rest of my life if it meant you'd look at me like this just once more. Her throat closed. She reached up, slowly, and brushed a streak of blood from his jaw with her thumb. The touch lingered. Neither moved. Then she whispered, so quiet only he could hear. Don't die for me, Kale. Not yet. He closed his eyes. Nodded once. I won't. She stepped back, remounted Nyx, rode toward the waiting column. Kale followed. And behind them, the silver veins in the shadow pine keep glittered like tears in the dying light. Chapter 9. The Final Moon. The ride back from Shadow Pine was quieter than the ride out. No one spoke of the arrows that had flown. No one mentioned the blood still drying on Kale's shoulder. The column moved like a single dark animal, disciplined, wounded, watchful. Aurelia kept her gaze forward the entire way. Nyx's hooves struck the frozen ground in steady rhythm, each beat echoing the war drum in her chest. She felt Kale at her left flank, exactly one stride behind as commanded. She felt the heat of his presence more than she felt the cold. By the time the palace gates rose in the distance, night had claimed the sky. The full moon hung low and heavy, bathing the world in cold, merciless silver. She dismissed the riders at the outer courtyard with a single raised hand. They melted away like shadows. Only Kale remained. She dismounted slowly, boots crunching on frost-kissed gravel, handed Nyx's reins to the waiting stablemaster without a word. Then she turned to him. He was already on the ground, standing too still, the line of his shoulders rigid with pain he refused to acknowledge. She studied the blood-soaked bandage on his arm, the one she'd tended only hours ago, now ruined again. Come with me, she said. Not a request. He followed her through the private corridors, past guards who bowed without meeting her eyes, past torchlight that flickered like uncertain memories. She led him to the small healing chamber tucked behind the throne room. Not the grand infirmary, but the one she used when she needed silence. Inside, the air smelled of dried herbs and cedar smoke. A low fire burned in the hearth. A single cot waited, clean linen folded at the foot. She closed the door behind them. The latch clicked like the end of a long sentence. Cale stood near the hearth, watching her with that quiet, burning intensity he'd carried since the gala. She walked to him, stopped close enough that she could see the faint tremor in his jaw from the pain. Without speaking, she reached for the clasps of his armor. One by one, she undid them, fingers steady, deliberate. The dark leather fell away piece by piece until only his torn shirt remained. Blood crusted along the seam of his shoulder. She peeled the fabric back. The wound was deeper than she'd realized. Not life-threatening, but angry. Red, weeping. She drew in a sharp breath. Cale watched her face the whole time. "You didn't have to take that arrow," she said, voice low. "I did." She met his eyes. "Why?" "Because the thought of it hitting you." His voice cracked. He swallowed hard. "Was worse than any pain I've ever felt." Aurelia's hand stilled on his skin. She looked down at the wound, then back up at him. Something inside her gave way. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a quiet final crack. She reached for the basin of warm water and clean cloths. Cleaned the wound again, slower this time. Gentler. Every time he hissed in pain, her movements paused. Every time his breath hitched, her thumb brushed the uninjured skin beside the gash. Small, unconscious comfort. When the wound was clean and freshly bandaged, she stepped back. But she didn't walk away. She stayed. Close. Too close. Cale lifted his good hand slowly, giving her every second to retreat. She didn't. His fingertips brushed her cheek, rough, calloused, trembling. "You're crying," he whispered. She hadn't realized. A single tear had escaped. Then another. She didn't wipe them away. Instead, she leaned forward, just enough, until her forehead rested against his chest right over his heart. He froze. Then slowly, so slowly, and his arms came around her. Not possessive, not demanding, just holding, like he was afraid she might vanish if he breathed too hard. She let herself feel it. The warmth of him, the steady thunder of his heartbeat, the faint scent of pine and blood and home that still clung to his skin after all these years. "I hated you," she said against his shirt, voice muffled, raw. "I hated you so much I could barely breathe some nights." "I know." "I still hate parts of you." "I know." She lifted her head, looked up into his face, saw the tears tracking silently down his own cheeks. "I don't want to hate you anymore," she whispered. Kyle's breath shuddered out of him. "Then don't." It was the simplest thing he'd ever said, and the hardest. She reached upward and cupped his face in both hands, thumbs brushing away his tears the way he'd brushed away hers in the war room. The moonlight poured through the narrow window, painting them both in silver. Two broken people standing in the wreckage of what they'd once been. She didn't kiss him. Not yet, but she stayed there, foreheads touching, breaths mingling, tears falling between them like quiet rain. "I don't know what comes next," she said softly. "Neither do I, but I know I don't want to face it alone." Cale closed his eyes, pressed his lips to her hair. Not a kiss, just contact. Just proof he was still there. "I'm not going anywhere," he murmured. "Not unless you send me." She let out a small broken sound and half sob, half laugh. "Then stay." He tightened his hold, just enough. "I will." They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other, bleeding together, breathing together, under a moon that had witnessed every fracture and every fragile mending. Outside, the palace slept. Inside, two hearts, scarred, stubborn, and finally beginning to beat in time again, waited for whatever dawn would bring. Chapter 10, Queen of Hearts. The small healing chamber felt smaller still as the night deepened. Neither of them had moved since the tears stopped falling. Foreheads still touching, breaths still shared. Bodies close enough to feel every subtle shift of the other's heartbeat. The fire in the hearth had burned down to glowing embers. Moonlight now dominated the room, turning everything silver and soft-edged. Aurelia was the first to speak. "I need to ask you something." Cale opened his eyes. His voice was quiet, careful. "Anything." She pulled back just enough to see his face clearly, searching, memorizing, weighing. "Do you still want the crown?" The question hung between them like a drawn blade. Kale didn't flinch. He didn't look away. I want whatever place you'll allow me, he said. Beside you, behind you, in the shadow of your throne. I don't need a title. I never did. I just need to know I'm not hurting you anymore. She studied him for a long moment. The man who had once broken her with a single sentence, now standing here stripped of every defense, offering her the only thing he had left. Truth. Aurelia took a slow breath. Then she stepped back, walked to the narrow window that overlooked the palace gardens and the endless dark forest beyond. She spoke without turning. Tomorrow is the coronation of the new moon cycle. The entire kingdom will gather. They will expect a queen, alone, unmatched, strong. She turned then, met his gaze across the room. I've been alone long enough. Kale's breath caught. She walked back to him, slow, deliberate, each step measured. When she reached him, she didn't stop. She lifted her hands to the collar of his torn shirt. Fingers curled gently into the fabric. I don't know if I can ever give you the bond again, she whispered. The old one is gone forever, but I can give you something else. She looked up into his eyes, steady, open, a little afraid. I can give you a choice. Kyle waited. She continued, voice soft but sure. Tomorrow, when the crown is placed on my head, stand at the bottom of the dais. Bow like the rest of the court. Then rise and walk away, disappear back to Ironfang. Live the life you chose when you rejected me. I will not stop you. I will not punish you. You will be free. She paused. Swallowed. Or, her fingers tightened in his shirt. Or stay. Not as my consort. Not as my king. Not as anything the court expects. Stay as mine. In whatever broken, beautiful, complicated way we can manage. Stay and let me learn, slowly, painfully, stubbornly, how to trust you again. Stay and let me love you the way I used to. Only wiser. Only stronger. A single tear traced down Kale's cheek. He didn't wipe it away. He simply reached up, covered her hands with his own where they still clutched his shirt. Then he lowered himself, slowly, reverently, and went to one knee. Not in submission to a queen, in offering to a woman he had once broken and would spend every remaining breath trying to cherish. He bowed his head, voice rough with emotion. I choose you, Aurelia. Every day, every night, every moon phase, I choose whatever version of us you're willing to build. Even if it's jagged, even if it hurts, even if it takes the rest of our lives. She looked down at him, at the proud alpha of Ironfang kneeling in a small healing room, bleeding and bandaged and finally, achingly honest. Her own tears fell freely now. She reached down, slid her fingers into his hair, tilted his face up. Then she leaned down, slow, giving him every chance to pull away. He didn't. She kissed him. Not like before, not hungry, not desperate, not reclaiming. Soft, slow. A kiss that tasted of salt and forgiveness and second chances. When she pulled back, their foreheads rested together again. Rise, she whispered. He stood. She took his hand, led him out of the healing chamber, through the silent corridors, past the guards who bowed without question, up the grand staircase to the royal balcony that overlooked the entire palace grounds. The moon hung full and bright above them. Below, the kingdom slept, unaware that everything was about to change. Aurelia stepped to the railing. Kale stood beside her, one stride back as always. She looked out at the sleeping world she had fought for, bled for, rebuilt from ashes. Then she looked at the man beside her, scarred, stubborn, beautiful in his brokenness. She reached for his hand again, laced their fingers together, and spoke, not loudly, not for the kingdom below, just for him. Tomorrow, she said, when the crown is placed, I want you standing on the dais, not behind me, beside me. Kale's breath caught. She turned to face him fully. Tomorrow we begin again, not as Alpha and Luna, not as king and queen, just as us. He brought their joined hands to his lips, pressed a kiss to her knuckles, voice thick with emotion. Us. The moon watched, silent, patient, eternal. And somewhere in the palace below, the first notes of tomorrow's coronation music began to drift, soft, hopeful, like the first breath after a long storm. Fade to black. The moon is still watching. The throne is hers, but the story isn't over until you decide what happens next. If your heart raced when she rose from the ashes, if you felt the ache when he knelt in moonlight, If you secretly, or not so secretly, cheered for the quiet ones who become unstoppable, then this is your moment. Drop a comment below. Would you forgive him? Would you let him stay? Or would you make him watch from the shadows forever? Tag a friend who needs to feel this kind of slow burn, soul-shaking, crown-wearing justice. Share the title. Spread the fire. Because stories like this don't end when the last chapter fades. They live in every reader who believes discarded hearts can still rule kingdoms. So tell me, are you ready to crown her all over again?